So please, hand for Bill Marsh.
Bill Marsh with CMG, networking guy. I worked on TCP back when TCP was still a draft standard, so that gives you an idea how old I am. And worked, my first internship was at the Defense Communications Agency. So that was kind of an interesting experience. At that point, we were dealing with 1.2 baud. We used to talk in baud, not bits per second. And and very fixed, hundreds of devices, on, in that case, the DARPANET, et cetera. We've changed a lot from there. So I'm going to go around the table, start with Ryan, and if everyone can introduce themselves, let's keep it just 30 seconds to a minute of yourself and your company.
Happy to. Yeah, thank you, Bill. It's great to be here. So I'm Anterix's Chief Operating Officer. I don't think I need to introduce the company. Rob did a fantastic job actually going through that. But let me complement it a little bit. So my background, for my entire career has been dedicated to bringing and solving complex telecommunications challenges for utilities. So starting my career as a telecom engineer up in Canada, I really got to see a unique perspective of, frankly, the opportunity and some of the challenges, that we saw in terms of bringing connectivity solutions and platforms to the growing need of digitization across the whole utility. And was fortunate to be able to take that knowledge from the utility and begin my career working with Silicon Valley company, who are focusing at the dawning era, I would say, in the early days of smart metering and smart grid, solving some pretty complex technical challenges around connecting to a lot of these new distributed assets. And that journey ultimately brought me here to Anterix. As Rob said, and in my opinion, really LTE, the spectrum opportunity solves a lot of the problems, that we've been dealing with as an industry, and frankly changes the game, in terms of what we can do in bringing digital systems together in a more ubiquitous way that's not challenged, with a lot of the history of lack of standardization, lack of openness, lack of ecosystem, and it's been just absolutely exciting to be able to start putting that spectrum to work in the building, of a true operating company, capturing all of the history that Rob mentioned, on the telecom space and what we've been doing with the heritage at Nextel, and bringing together that, with the mega sector of skills and competencies, domain specific to utilities. And it's absolutely brought those two sector capabilities together in an absolutely fascinating way. I think we're starting to see the fruits of those labors and the development of the ecosystem and the solutions, and really starting to be able to help utilities with the adoption, and ramping up the learning curve about how to put LT to work for just a plethora of use cases. So couldn't be more excited to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, and I think next is Edison.
Yes. I'm Edison Llerena. I am here representing Easymetering, which is a company based of Ecuador that is using smart metering technology. And we're trying to bridge the gap that exists currently between utilities and the end user. We believe that by making the end user more active when selecting the sources of energy that it has available, we can change the power metrics. We want to make the end user aware that there are new renewable sources of energy that they have access to, and we're trying to make it very easy for them so that they can, using home appliances, for example, that are very smart and home smart meters, they are going to be able to select from different providers. They are going to be able to select from different technologies what is best suitable for them. We believe that by doing this, we can encourage the user to move from fossil energies to renewable energies.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Edison. And Michael, right? Yep.
Mike, yep.
You go by Michael, right?
Michael, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking. Appreciate that. Hey, good afternoon. I'm Michael Welsh. I'm with AT&T. I think I'm one of the few people I don't have to explain what company I'm from. I think everyone's heard of AT&T. I'm with the AT&T 5G Center of Excellence. So that means that I evangelize cellular, private cellular, 5G, and edge computing at AT&T. I've been in telecom. I've been a carrier guy most of my career. Actually, just about all 30 years of my career, I've been telecom. I've worked for Verizon, I've worked for Quest, and I've been with AT&T for about 18 years. And all but 2 of those years, I've been on the wireline side. So I have a deep history with all of the 400 plus products AT&T sells on the wireline side. And about 2 years ago, I came over to the mobility side, and taking that knowledge from the wireline side, and the dirty secret about cellular is that it's 90% wireline. So, having the foundation of the wireline side, but then understanding now the wireless needs of enterprise customers and governments and schools and DoD and everybody else, it's been a great ride. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Michael. I wanted to just take one moment and make sure when we talk about IoT, and we kind of look at it as a whole ecosystem. I know we've used that word several times. It's kind of an overused word like paradigm these days, but I'm going to talk a little bit just for a moment on architecture. Because when people think about IoT, they typically focus on the devices, right? It's an Internet of Things. Billions and billions, literally, they discuss of devices, how you address those, how you do all of that. There are a lot of other elements to that. There's gateways. There's the event or element component of it. There's what is it you're trying to automate in doing that, in using those either as input sensors or output control, either way. And then of course, there's the whole cloud element of this, which is the big data, and then finally the reporting and actioning on that IoT infrastructure and how you use it. So I just wanted to put that up for one moment. We'll leave that up. I think we have a small panel here, and everybody knows everyone. So yeah. Remember, Ryan, Edison, Michael. So the first question I wanted to ask, I'm going to make it a tough one on all of you, is because you all have different perspectives on what IoT is. I want a 1-minute definition from each of you of what is industrial. We're talking about industrial in this case, not industrial Internet of Things. So, and I'm going to go reverse order this time. I'm going to start with you, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, one of my publicly released customers is Samsung Austin Semiconductor. So as I talk to them about their IoT needs, industrial IoT needs, it's the same conversation I have with just about all of my customers. It's understanding what their current environment is, and I have a slide in my deck that's scary close to this slide, and I call it the 6-way match slide, because it talks about not just the device, it talks about the spectrum that it also operates on. It talks about the application that it's using and where that application is, whether it's on the premise, if it's in the cloud, or if it's at a traditional data center. And the medium in between that, what does this core network look like that gets you there? So that is a great starter slide for me. It's almost like I planned it, because it is something that every IoT conversation needs to be a holistic conversation. Not just the device, whether it's Wi-Fi or it's wired or if it's got a SIM card in it, but how is it going to connect? What spectrum is it going to use? And how do you need to perform? Is it something that's, you're going to pull information from that, and then that device has to react, either based on human intervention or based on AI, whatever it might be, or based on machine-to-machine learning. It all comes down to it has to have that entire data path cared for. Is that longer than a minute? Sorry.
It was longer than a minute, which means that you only get 45 seconds, Edison. I'm kidding. You get your full minute as well.
Yeah, so we're talking about Internet of Things and the industrial environment. We're talking about communicating so many devices, but this involves all the aspects of the network communication, right? We don't only have the sensors on the one side. As you said, we need to talk about the media, which is probably the most critical part of the connection. And we also have to talk about the usages that we can give to these Internet of Things. If we are able to provide some services like telemetry, for example, if we are able to transfer data in both directions. And in the case of our technology, we're trying to transfer data that makes sense to the end user. And this is not going to be it's not going to be transferred if you don't have the right media. Internet of Things also refers to how are you able to reach to long distances. when you have communication between device to device. So it's a heavy topic.
59 seconds. All right, very good.
Thanks.
There's the bar you've got to meet now, Ryan.
No problem. Yeah, when I think about IoT, and again, my lens is really from the utility side, but I largely put in the perspective of IoT as being, an enabler to execute on a series of outcomes. And, at the end of the day, yes, there's connected technologies, there's medium and transport and cloud and all those different things, but what I think really matters is what, as a sector, we're able to do with that. When I use the term synonymously with digitization, which is more actively used, as I see in the utility side, but I tend to put it almost into these three categories. The outcomes of IoT and digitization in the common utility landscape, I put into trying to seek operational efficiencies, to be able to bring automation, to be able to seek improved reliability or increased resiliency, through having a diverse sensor ecosystem, which is really about sourcing data and control points to be able to help bring that increased visibility and control into the grid. I see it about meeting disruptors. We have capabilities within the utility landscape about really trying to extend the operations and the capability of the core utility distribution networks, and that could be around building to future opportunities, whether it's the incorporation of mass distributed renewables or the electrification of transportation. All huge opportunities that will have a dramatic digital component that I see as a natural extension of every one of those devices being a future IoT device that lives on these platforms. And finally, I see the opportunity to really enhance just the business model, really challenging what the future of energy is and what the future of utilities means through enhanced services or enhanced visibility, and really being able to use something as fundamental as a technology platform such as LTE to be able to open up all kinds of new opportunities, that utilities can particularly participate in and really extend what that business opportunity is for them.
Thank you. All right, you win. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. So with that, you can see there's no one definition really of what IoT is, what it means, what it represents. I mean, it starts with, this whole view of many devices. And those devices, one thing I want to ask is, I'm going to go to Michael at AT&T first, because there are several different models we have here on the panel today. All you can eat model, I'm going to call it, is really what the private LTE model is. You have a much more metered model, or a per device model, is the AT&T pricing model. And maybe you do have a all you can eat as well that I'm not quite aware of. Yeah. But traditionally you've tried to price it in a way that is very attractive for fairly low bandwidth type of utilization, simple telemetry, simple control. I wonder if you can talk about what those challenges are, because again, in that model you have to make a profit and you have to have a P&L that works with that pricing model. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because that's for many of the parties out here, that's where the rubber really meets the road for them, is what does it cost?
So my life is spectrum. My oil is spectrum. So as I talk to customers and I talked about their applications and understanding, I don't say 5G, I don't say LTE, I don't say CBRS. I say, what are your applications? What are your throughput requirements? What are you trying to accomplish with this environment? And as I go from there, the good thing and the bad thing about AT&T is we have a lot of solutions. So, narrowing it down to, you're right, the traditional IoT type of environment is go get an IoT specific SIM card, put it in your device, and we'll give you an IoT data plan for that, and it is metered. What I talk more about is true private cellular inside of a fence line. Yeah. And that is an environment for edge computing. And that's an environment where that SIM card can live on the macro network, but that SIM card can also live on a microcosm of that macro. And that's all accomplished by edge computing. That's by capturing that device and bringing it into a LAN environment, essentially.
So just to understand, if I may interject, you will allow a a migration, if you will, a seamless migration between a
On
private,
license.
a private service and a public service on the same ESN.
Yeah. On licensed spectrum, we can say you have a SIM card that if you leave this fence line, it'll pass off to the next macro tower and work. If it's in this environment, it's payload traffic. Control plane is still going out to the macro and authenticating, security, and doing all that, but the payload traffic is staying localized. When that payload traffic stays localized, we don't charge for it.
Right.
So there is an all-you-can-eat aspect of it. We can't figure out how to charge for it because we don't see it, which is kind of the secret, but that's fine. The other options that we have are, private, some people call it private LTE, I call it private cellular,
Yep.
that is based on CBRS.
Right,
So-
and that is 3 gigahertz, is that?
3.5, 5,
3.5.
yeah, gigahertz, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a good mid-band spectrum. I mean, but CBRS has puts and takes. It's a shared environment. If a corporation sets up shop right next to you, you're sharing unless you have a priority access license.
Okay.
And
I'm going to put Ryan on the spot here for a moment because, obviously, AT&T has a private LTE solution. You have a private LTE solution. AT&T also has a public solution, if I may call it that, a public solution.
Yeah.
Although, I use that term a little differently in the IoT space, but a open carrier solution. You don't have a solution like that. Do you feel that you need a solution like that? Or if you need it, will you partner with somebody, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, et cetera, to get that?
Yeah, great question. And frankly, just to address the first part, I mean, all of us, I would say, who are trying to participate in providing the private network solutions, have far more in common than we do different, in terms of what we're trying to, put together and ultimately the requirements that we're trying to address. And I think it's those requirements that are probably the most fundamental, to what crafts the way that we're approaching it, which is different depending on what sectors. Certainly I would say, large enterprises, might have a quite dramatic different set of expectations, use cases, and even affordability, in terms of how they're thinking about, the opportunity to be able to explore and take value from private networks. Obviously, our specific focus, is really on, on the utility sector. And, some of the specific things that we hear most commonly in that sector, fall in under the category of control is what we hear.
Right.
Is really one of those primary conversations. And, and so what does that mean? I mean, what does control mean, when we hear it from a utility? And I put it into this perspective, when we hear control in the conversation, it means not having to compromise, on the design and the technical choices that truly matter to the fundamental operations of what they're going to use that network for. And that could mean being able to build that network, into territories that don't otherwise even have service opportunities. The utility footprint, as we see, is very diverse. It covers a lot of very sparse rural areas, and obviously it covers a lot of very urban geographies. And what utilities don't have is the luxury of not providing equivalent services to all their customers, right? Whether they're providing energy, or they're providing metering services, or they're providing reliability, they have the necessity to be able to provide those, relatively seamlessly across their whole service territory. We also see that in the characteristics of just what they're building out in their infrastructure that supports these networks. That can be the robustness of the towers, of the vertical assets. That can be the backup supply that they want to be able to survive by. As we're seeing again play out right now, in the tails of the hurricane, networks and the infrastructure are the most critical assets that need to be there when it matters the most. And, that can take, and utilities can individually then take, a specific set of measures around how and what survivability measures they want to build that infrastructure is there so it's reliable and capable when they need it the most. And then the third one I'll just add into that, kind of equation really comes into the security realm. They understand their landscape. They understand their threat vectors better than anybody. And by being able to architect in a relative, I'll say, greenfield build perspective, can architect cyber and physical security in from the ground up. And that's a significant advantage over trying to retrofit, various components and touch points. And so again, I put all of that in this context of control that really drives our offering, AT&T's and certainly others that we see in the space. And I think we'll see, this conversation continue to evolve, as more use cases and more needs and these requirements get tighter and tighter by definition over time. All of us will adapt, and seek partnerships and collaborations and, all of those kinds of things. 'Cause at the end of the day, I know we have the same vision about what we're trying to solve, and we're really trying to help a sector or sectors, with being able to embrace these kinds of technologies.
Thank you. So I'm going to now ask Edison a different question, because kind of a related question, because we've talked here, and Charles used a great term that I think is going to become a new term, become the next paradigm or ecosystem overused term, is he talked about air gapping. And air gapping is creating this, the most secure type of environment you can possibly create is by not being interconnected whatsoever, and utilities like that. Edison, you don't have that luxury because you're not controlling, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3 of the network. You're really riding on top of that as a managed service. So how do you address, can you participate in those segments that require, let's call it air gapping, or will you simply relinquish those particular segments? If you can kind of comment on that a little bit in this IoT space.
Well, in terms of our, I can only speak for our technology. So as you say, we are not really in that low layers space. So we have to relinquish it in that case. Okay.
So what I want to do, we're kind of at halfway point. I was going to see if there was one question, if somebody had one particular question for one or more of the panelists. Otherwise, I'll continue with my question. I'll give an opportunity to get a question out here. I don't know if I don't see anybody running to the microphone right now, so I will, I'll kind of continue on. There was another thing that Charles talked about, and I thought was kind of interesting, and Andreas as well, which is about this whole concept of the ecosystem of what I'm going to call curated application, curated devices, curated solutions. And they're really sort of two, we do have a question. Sorry, okay. Do you have a question?
Hi, I'm Jonathan Van from Element 8, founding sponsor of Cedar. I was just wondering, for the gentleman from AT&T, you mentioned how edge compute, inside the fence is changing different use cases. Maybe everyone can speak to it, but how does that, is there a sea change? What are the use cases that you're actually seeing that as, we have hyperscale cloud, but as you get things that need low latency or something like that, what are the transformations that are happening at the enterprise level or use case level?
Yep. Good question, and it's a fair question. I get asked a lot about use cases, and really, I almost 100% of the time turn it around on, well, at the end of the day, the use case is your use case. It's what you're trying to accomplish. So let me hear more about that. But yeah, the use cases, I have a slide that literally says the use cases are unlimited, because when you get into worker safety, connected worker, you get into video as a sensor, you get into AR, VR, digital twin, and I can go on for probably 10 minutes. But yeah, there's a lot of specific utilities type of use cases as well. But the conversation around edge computing and how that's transforming, because usually what makes the headlines is the performance, ultra low latency, 10 milliseconds, 20 milliseconds, whatever that might be. That is one of three items that is the value statement for edge computing. Performance is one, control and security is another one. If your payload traffic is never leaving your fence line, then you have complete control over that type of, all of your, your data. And then the third one that was also mentioned initially was, it's not a meter product. So it is a, a cost savings at the end of the day as well.
And depending on what
one last thing, but depending on what your use case is, if it is video, if it is something heavy bandwidth, as we start to unfold and look at those and drill down into those, if you do this over the macro network where we are charging you, it can get pretty costly. So,
are those systems typically things that engineers like the IT at the enterprise access like they would AWS or others, or is it just like on-prem?
Yeah, that's the question I asked right behind what's your application, where's your application? Is it in the CSP? Is it at a data center? Is it on-premise? Or is it on the device? There can be computing happening on the device now. I call that pre-sim computing. So that's, if you want to write that one down.
Thank you.
I like that pre-sim. I like that. Edison, you have anything you want to add?
No, sorry.
Okay. Yep. Ryan?
Yeah, I'll add just one thing to it, specific what we've been seeing, and frankly, I'll up-level maybe just what the concept of edge computing is. I mean, we've seen embedded compute, in devices for a while now, and, it's absolutely been an evolution of kind of what that capability is. It was frankly a bit of a chicken and egg conversation for a long time, in the space. What could you do, was really the question that we got asked, when we were introducing it. But I would say there's absolutely applications, that are out there that are leveraging, at least on the micro scale, capabilities to make decisions at the edge, right? Being able to make decisions and cause effect. Frankly, we're even seeing it embedded in some of the smart meters, that are out there in the early days, being able to do more real-time information. Rob referenced the one example we had with San Diego with the falling conductor. You don't detect decision and control, a line shut off in less than 1.4 seconds without some edge compute, right? That's not a centralized processing conversation. That's something where we're able to take that information in, process it as close to the edge as possible, and make a real-time decision about it. And for us, the key in that, as he said, had really been lacking, the deterministic communication system to be able to make that kind of stuff happen, in a more distributed model. And I think you're going to see more of that. I think, frankly, once the toolkit gets out there and you see more of these capabilities, at least in the energy landscape, there's plenty of future use cases that I could envision, where having real-time control and, frankly, more autonomous, kinds of activities can only be helpful to what utilities are trying to do.
Excellent. I love that. I'm going to steal that now. Plagiarism, anywhere, this is kind of pseudo-academic. There's an academic component to this, and I don't think he's cutting me off yet. I think I still have another 20. Jeez. What's up with the mood lighting, gentlemen? I don't want them to fall asleep on me.
Somebody leaned against
But I love this pre-sim term because I do, I know that particularly when people look at utilities and you look at their computational power, and you realize every smart meter of those 80 million plus meters that are out there today all have, an ARM core in them, some sort of 32 or 64-bit ARM core with a few meg. It's incredible what could possibly happen out there. We could spend a lot more time just on that over here on the edge. But I want to come back to the compatibility issue because I really think this is interesting because there are really two different models here, and then I come back to the Apple, sort of the Apple App Store model. Everything's highly curated, controlled, managed, very well understood, very well certified, if you will. Then there's the Wild West model, which is you just connect anything. It might work, it might not work. And it's buyer beware on the edge relative to those IoT elements in an industrial setting, sensors, control elements, et cetera. What are your, we heard already, from Charles a little bit on that. So I'm gonna start with, I'll start with Edison this time, asking about your curation. Does that matter relative to having an ecosystem where you have certified devices? In other words, they're allowed elements, non-allowed elements on your network, or is the way that you're architected, you'll allow those and they either work or they don't work as advertised?
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused.
If you need a moment to think, we could turn to Michael and come back if you like. Let's go with Michael and then.
Yeah, I liken it to a firewall discussion, years ago when there, it used to be called firewall, then there was next gen firewall, and now there's SASE. So, you have all these different layers of, how are you securing a device? I've talked to customers that, yeah, we've got some IoT going on. I was like, well, what's that running over? How are you securing it? And just, you see the blood run out of people's face, like, yeah, I guess you're right that this is touching our network, so we should be a little bit more prudent on how we're securing the meter or whatever it might be. So one maybe, not maybe misconception, but one maybe unknown part of cellular is LTE is 128-bit encrypted out of the box. So, you're doing that over the air. Every session is its own session. So it's completely different from Wi-Fi. Right. That's what a lot of people unfortunately don't, even CIOs I speak with are like, I see them as both just wireless. I'm like, well, okay,
all you have to do is packet sniff those two different
exactly.
groups, and it becomes very clear.
And then the plug for 5G is it's 256, bit encryption. So it'll have a higher level of encryption as well. And there's other aspects of 5G that are security, based as well. But what I would say is when you're looking at your devices and you're looking at your ecosystem, we look at it as, again, that six-way match. This slide up here is like we look at the entire path, not just if somebody compromises that device, but what if something happens over the air? What if something happens at your data center? What if something happens, anywhere in your environment? How is that entire path, secured?
Got it. But do they certify then across that entire path?
So I'll equate that to kind of the SD-WAN environment over the last 5-6 years. A lot of players, a lot of people jumping in, in the pool to say, I've got this IoT device, I've got this application, and I see that ecosystem, we're going as fast as we can in our certification process. We're adding, vendors on every day, but at some point, I think those vendors are going to start to consolidate just like the SD-WAN landscape, and it'll be more uniform. Yeah,
it'll be a challenge because you can't really certify every combination there. It becomes an infinite number. So Edison, you want to comment on that?
I'm sorry, not feeling well.
Okay. Ryan?
Yeah, happy to. Rob referenced, kind of what our view was, in the launch of the Anterix Active Ecosystem. Let me frame kind of how we've approached it, been putting that together. So obviously at the end of the day, we absolutely see the world, from the lens of outcomes and solutions. So trying to make sure we've got all of the components of the necessary ecosystem together, so our customers can have, maximum opportunity to be able to leverage the connected devices and the landscape that we see building in front of us. And we've built that model in our ecosystem program absolutely to maintain, the highest level of integrity that we can, in terms of how we work with our partners, how we drive collaboration, to a certain extent, how we work to demonstrate and validate for our own interests, the compatibility across, the platforms as we present it to our customers. Because one of the attributes we're really trying to pursue and provide to the customers, is a trusted understanding, that when we're working with partners in the Anterix Active Ecosystem, while it's not certification, Bill, I think that would be a stretch to go that far. We are confident in terms of understanding, its device or its solutions application as it may work on top of an LTE network. And we believe that brings at least the first layer of understanding and application security, to what could be a more diverse ecosystem where you don't know, even the basics of interconnection and interoperability.
Thank you both, and we're down one. So I've got my two private LTE guys here. Basically, we could have a little cage match if you guys like. I don't know if we.
It's funny because I never use the term private LTE because it does, sometimes it means different things to different people.
Correct.
I say private cellular in the sense that it could be LTE, it could be 5G, it could be Cbrs, it could be 900 megahertz, it could be, anything. It could be, millimeter wave.
My bad on that.
No, that was not intended to be hey, don't say that again.
I understand that typically when people hear private LTE, they think private cellular, which often includes a voice component, kind of taking on trunk mobile radio, that type of thing.
And the great thing about, Anterix and what they're doing as well is there are models where, your radio and your environment is going to be able to roam off of that network and onto an AT&T network. That democratization of spectrum that's happening, where it's a term, it's called multi-operator cellular networks, MOCN. So where we're doing it today in our FirstNet network, where FirstNet and our regular cellular network, coexist and they roam with each other. That's going to happen with more and more partners as we go forward. So I see absolutely a spot for all owners of spectrum as we go forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We're not getting the battle quite that you were looking for here, Bill, but
I mean, I'm a little disappointed.
There's been such a lack of just available spectrum and solutions to be able to build on that. We couldn't be more fans, frankly, all the different options. And there's so much that I see in terms of capabilities when you start putting these building blocks together. Cbrs, for example, is one that a lot of our customers already supporting, and we're big fans of. Just being able to put the pieces together, in a way that's quite complementary opens up a whole different set of opportunities as we think about it. And by having, at least from our lens, being able to build foundational coverage, with the privacy, I'll say, a fully licensed 900 megahertz spectrum actually in some ways is complementary to what what Cbrs can do, that Michael was talking about, in terms of some of the access control challenges that you can have with Cbrs,
right.
And being able to take advantage of what it's great at, and not having to compromise again, on some other areas, by being able to build it on top of and complementary to what you might do on on a more secure and licensed band like 900 megahertz.
Thank you. So one other question I want to ask. We talk about IoT. That's what this is. We talk about industrial networks, industrial Internet of Things. That's what the focus here is, not a consumer-oriented, residential-oriented type of solution. But I wonder if you can split between industrial and I wrote down here which a public IoT, which would be governmental, et cetera, to differentiate from the industrial IoT, because when you really talk, you may be talking MOUs and IOUs, but principally, the list of customers you listed were IOUs. You don't see too many municipal players in that space yet. Although it makes a lot of sense for a muni, because munis like to expense things rather than capitalize. They don't like to spend a lot of their budget on capital expenditure. But I'm wondering if you can talk about sort of some of the public applications, relative to this, beyond utilities and emergency first responder, et cetera. What would be some of those public applications? And I'll start with AT&T again.
Sure. So I was speaking with somebody at lunch about AT&T is verticalized. So we have financial verticals, retail verticals, healthcare, finance, and then government and education, and where I cover all of those, but where I am doing a lot of conversations with is around higher ed, and around what is 5G and what does private cellular and what does IoT, curriculum look like in higher ed, and what are they trying to accomplish? And it's a multi-layered conversation, because one part of it is about where they're trying to educate. They have IoT curriculums, right, where they have classes that are. And then I ask the next question, is that a business class or is that an engineering class? And they say, yes, we have both. Yes. I was like, okay, that's fantastic, because we're setting up environments, not just a lab environment for this higher education, but then it's like, hey, I'm putting in a purpose-built RAN on your campus that now you can use for these classes, for labs, but then let's talk about your irrigation systems, talk about your HVAC, talk about everything else that you can use in that public domain that's not just used for one purpose. And then I have, the labs usually have a millimeter wave, the very high frequency, 39 gigahertz is what AT&T, operates on, and then the sub-6 gigahertz that we operate on in the rest of the campus. And then the last part of that is, how does that, we get paid on subscription, so we got to make sure, what's the student and the faculty experience like in some of these buildings that are either very old and RF doesn't penetrate it, or they're very new and they're LEED certified and the glass is, filmed.
Is metallized, yeah.
Yeah, and they can't, it doesn't penetrate at all. So all aspects, from a lab to curriculums to their operations to the consumers that are walking in and out of the campus.
So Ryan, I'm going to ask you, you've said multiple times, and Charles as well, you're really focused on the utility, but do you have aspirations beyond that?
Well, let me put it this way. If you reference even just kind of the municipals and the co-ops, I absolutely see the use cases being similar.
Right.
I put a lot of attention, obviously, on the IOUs, as you mentioned, but that is not exclusive. Those applications I see absolutely being pervasive when you get down into the municipals and the co-ops, and see an interconnect that's quite logical between all of those different entities and the way that they provide services.
Right.
I'll maybe go a different direction that crosses into the more IoT or the consumer side, we see playing out in a lot of these conversations, and it's in the territory of rural broadband. Obviously, at the end of the day, when we're talking about building an LTE network, we're not just talking about the air interface in the last mile. We're talking about infrastructure build inclusive of middle mile, of fiber, of vertical infrastructure, of all of the other components. And we're huge proponents of the idea, and we're seeing this conversation play out in a lot of the utility landscapes of at least the investment, whether it's the fiber cables that create the backbone to the RAN, or it's the vertical infrastructure that creates the facility to put the broadcast station up for your LTE node. That investment, is not unique or exclusive to LTE, nor should it be. That can solve a significant part of the commercial barrier to be able to bring broadband into rural America. If that asset and that investment, that infrastructure can be used to address that component of the commercial opportunity. And don't hear me wrong, I don't get the impression largely from the largest utilities in the nation that they want to be ISPs. They're not looking to compete, in that space, but they are looking to help. They're looking to service their constituents and keep digital services in play, because at the end of the day, for them, they want to keep those people living there. Those are ratepayers to them, and they want to be able to keep and provide services to them. And by being able to bring and enhance, the capabilities of offering some of this middle mile and vertical infrastructure, and then working with the ISPs in rural America to be able to provide services more economically, I do see a connection between what we're doing and other ways of helping consumers.
Do you see the same, Michael?
The same as far as what?
The same as far as, you use the specific example of utilities wanting to extend or leverage that capability in order to support their constituent, their customers. I think it's funny you call them ratepayers. I'm looking for somebody who, ratepayers is very much an IOU terminology because it's, that's how they get paid, right? It's based on a rate of return from those ratepayers. I just thought it was kind of interesting. I'd prefer to call them customers, but for their customers.
Yeah, and I'll take a piece that was on the panel this morning when she was talking about the willingness to approve permits and to work and partner, and so to make it more frictionless to get these environments put in place is paramount, because I've been working with I'm from Dallas, and I've been working with a large, city up there that was very, very low on the technology scale. And we figured out that our market RAN folks were having issues getting permits, approved and right-of-ways. And once that made it to the mayor and there was a partnership that was agreed upon, it moved very quickly. And we see those conversations happening with utility companies as well. It's like, hey, we've got poles, we've got right-of-ways, let's work together on this. And anytime I can make an introduction or make a pathway to success for deployment, that's well received. So yeah, there's definitely an openness there. But I'm not construction engineering. I'm not hanging radios. I'm just
understood.
I'm the pretty face.
Let me take this up a couple levels then, up to spectrum itself. The spectrum obviously is regulated. Licenses are managed by the FCC, federal government at the federal level. What other activities do you see at the federal level, either incenting, accelerating, and or, if we could just talk among friends, stunting or slowing the adoption of, an IoT, infrastructure that then will allow this, this ubiquitous control everywhere all the time?
So something that happened last summer was I mentioned earlier, the Cbrs PAL license auction that happened last summer. So to open up that, and if you're just high level CBRS, it's a shared environment of spectrum, but you can purchase by county a priority access license on that spectrum. That's that 3.5 gigahertz.
I wasn't aware they're doing it by a county footprint, not MSA or RSA.
That's by county. Yeah, it's by county, and it's public. You know, you can go see who bought what licenses and what counties, and then the second part is the C-band auction, and that's that's in the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum as well,
Right.
and opening up that, and then AT&T sits there and looks at, just like all carriers, what do we have to work with, and what is that? How can we best utilize that for what our customer needs are? Honestly, most customers right now are still LTE, and they will be for a very long time. So we're dedicating a small amount of spectrum to 5G today. So what does that look like as you go up and down the offerings, and then you start looking at your needs for bandwidth, throughput, and everything else, and you kind of match it up.
Okay.
That's our approach.
And Ryan, relative to at a higher level, federal level, help, hinder, neutral?
There's a lot going on in our space, at those various levels. But one I'll certainly reference, is we're, I'm sure, all paying attention to what's happening in terms of some of the infrastructure funding,
Right.
starting to look more likely. And a large part of it, is targeted at various sectors, related to IoT, digitization, rural broadband, cybersecurity, certainly all areas that intersect, many aspects of this topic that we've been talking about. And there's a couple good things that come of it, frankly, with or without funding. Actually, I'll decouple those for a minute. That conversation, at the national level is helpful. I think it connects a lot of these pieces together and drives awareness down into our nation's regulators that aren't all just happening at the federal level. It starts to educate even the state regulators, who are aware of some of those macro topics. The funding I just see then as really an accelerator in terms of what it can do to be able to help push some of these initiatives over and really drive the ambitions to try to get some of those things done. But I think we're also finding, at the federal level, there's just national conversations playing out and talking about the energy space for a minute, around how to enhance reliability, how to support each other, whether it's in wildfires in the West or it's dealing with these ongoing natural disasters like hurricanes and floods. Which again, there's, ways I see, really the ecosystem and the nation's community of technology companies and utilities and energy suppliers really partnering together. And the same goes in the cybersecurity conversation. There was a White House event just again a couple weeks ago. Right. And so it's absolutely playing out, at the federal, and state levels, a lot of these conversations that I see as ultimately, good signs in terms of where the natural direction goes. But there's a long way to go, on a lot of those topics.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I see. Are you asking a question, or are you?
I think we
please
need
introduce yourself.
I think there's
before
a
you-
lot of questions here. I feel
Well,
it's burning.
Please introduce yourself first.
Oh, Darth Vader, I was called earlier. But real quick, when you guys think about the transformation, the possibilities, 5G, roaming on multiple networks, multiple SIMs, walk me through, what does it look like 3 years from now? And I know it's hard to predict, but 3 years from now, a billion things connected, all in 5G, private LTE, 4G, roaming, back and forth, industrial private network, connected vehicles, utilities. What does that look like? What 3 years from now, AT&T, Anterix, what do you all think?
I'm happy to take a stab. Andres, my opinion is I think the conversation of LTE, 4G, or 5G 5 years from now is going to be, frankly, irrelevant. What we're going to be talking about is the evolution of the landscape of what we can do on top of these various networks. And every application is going to have a different set of requirements. Some may need 5G at that time and some may not. But I think what we're going to find through the adoption and the evolution of IoT is just the ability to be able to enhance the operation, whether it's of the grid or smart cities or smart connected vehicles. Those things will start to unlock themselves as these capabilities become pervasive and they become out there. It's just like the internet did, and Rob referenced the cell phone. What can be built on top of those? On the internet was a digital economy. On a smartphone was an app store. On digital industrial networks of the future, whether it's for utilities or for oil and gas or mining or whatever it is, I think the sky's the limit in terms of what we're going to be able to build on top of it. As it relates to the future of the grid, I think what you're going to see is many different forms of renewables and distributed energies and microgrids, and more sensing and control and reliability than we can even possibly comprehend right now. And every one of those devices is going to require connectivity, right? They have to be controlled, they have to be protected, they have to be monitored. And I see that as the opportunity really for the sector in terms of being able to capture some of this capability of evolving digital 4G, 5G migration as we start building the infrastructure networks of the future.
Michael?
Sure. So I don't like AT&T's marketing. I'll just put that out there. And this is not intended to be an AT&T commercial by any means, but when I look at what carriers are doing and where we are truly with true 5G and where it's going, and when it's not just the device, the chipset, it's also the core network that all three big carriers are migrating to a true 5G environment. True 5G, I can quickly go down in the weeds, but it's the things you're hearing about, network slicing, and you're hearing about private routing. That's not even here yet. So when we get to this true 5G, where it is the abilities for that massive IoT connectivity, massive being not thousands, but tens of thousands of IoT devices, that is going to change. Now, we obviously have projections of our own, but that's going to change dramatically as we, over the next 3 years. But that doesn't happen without the air interface to support it. And this is a plug, it's not going to happen without the infrastructure of a company that owns more fiber than anybody, and that's us. So, it comes down to, it has to be true 5G. It has to hit the ground at the bottom of that tower, but be on an industry-leading standalone core as well. And today we're on non-standalone core. So those are the bits and pieces that I would encourage everybody to, there's a lot of information out there that part of my job is myth busting and resetting kind of, hey, expectations, but also here's where we are, tell me what you're trying to do, and then I'll tell you, in my best estimation of, the best way to design that and build that for you, or just use the macro network. Just use the AT&T network or the Verizon or the T-Mo network that's there today. So it's an interesting spot. I'm super happy to be in it. It's super exciting and it's moving super fast, but also I'm still surprised that, the cellular conversation is a little bit foggy still. You're probably all the experts in the room, but it's outside this room, wow. It's, people are watching the commercials and buying into it a little bit too much. Not just our commercials, all the commercials. So just
I haven't seen an Anterix commercial, but I appreciate it, Michael. It's definitely not your mother's AT&T anymore. That's for sure. I really appreciate your openness and frankness on where you are. Anterix as well. And Ryan, thank you very much. Thank you, Charles. And with that, I will turn it over to Andreas. Thank you.